Hello, everybody. This is Brian O'Haron. 999, I'm reminded by Dave. September 9th, 2009. And this is my 100th program in a row since beginning this program, Planning for Success. No misses. No, I didn't have 13 misses over 2 years. I didn't have any. No misses. No excuses. I even came and did the programs and prepared for them when I was sick. Now, luckily, I didn't have serious illnesses, just pretty bad colds, and you could tell that on some of the programs. And there were no repeats. Didn't repeat one program. And I did that on purpose because that's what businessmen do. They show up for meetings. They show up prepared. It takes me almost a week to prepare for each of these programs. And I'm lucky, I'm retired. But you know, when you retire, people say, oh, you have plenty of time. You don't. You do more when you retire than you do when you're working. The only thing I do less of is travel right now. I will travel more in the future. I did hear, I don't watch any of the other programs because I pretty well know what they're going to say anyway, so I don't watch them. But I do hear that Selectman Perez said, well, she did miss 13 meetings. I know because I counted them over there. Might even be a couple more because there were a couple meetings where they didn't take attendance at the budget, a couple of the budget meetings over the last couple of years. But she had excuses. She was excused. Well, to me, that doesn't count. Excuses 1 in 2 years, maybe 2, but not many more. Also, the businessmen, they can rearrange their business easier than she can to attend these meetings. My view is very simple. That's why we want businessmen, because they can rearrange their schedules and they can pay more attention to our business, our taxpayers' money, and running our business. And they can do the homework necessary. I think when an educator spends her life telling people to practice in the sports area and do their homework, that they should also do their homework. I watched a selectman meeting last night, and I saw several examples. I might play some clips in the next couple of weeks where she, once again, appeared not to have done any homework and couldn't even remember that Henry Centrella, the finance director, is going to go to the selectmen meeting 2 weeks after the end of the month. Everybody knows that. That's the most important thing we're watching right now is the finances in the budget for this year. So to me, that's inexcusable. And my view is, be careful who you vote for because you'll have to live with it. Now we will go to the agenda. First thing I'm going to do this time is go over the time remaining until the November election. Then I'm going to have clip number 1 from a recent selectman meeting about marijuana. I have a list of the disgruntled losers in the last election, and pay attention to this list because I'm going to be telling you Brian's history of Winsted tonight, and in the second half of the story they might enter into the tale. I'm going to talk a bit about Rip Van Winkle, New Yorker. We have a lot of New Yorkers around here. I'm going to talk a bit about the Trojan horse of Troy. And then a short history that I've pulled together about the town of Winchester up to the present time. And a lot of it, the last part of it I wrote myself. And it is light-spirited, and I did, this is the second history book, Winsted and the town of Winchester. Boyd's Annals, I couldn't find a copy of in the libraries. They're all checked out, and I couldn't even find my own copy because I lent it out to people. And then some of the pictures I'll be showing tonight will be from the Images book. Images of Winston, Connecticut, by June Sinak, who I'm told used to work at the library, Beardsley Ann Memorial Library, until her later years. Election Day, November 3rd, 2009. There are 55 days to the election. There are 8 weeks to the election. There's 1.75 months to the election. And the final weekly program, Planning for Success, will be on Wednesday, October 28th, 2009, the last Wednesday before the election, on the following Tuesday. It's a promise I made 2 years ago. I hope I don't miss any more meetings until then. Now, I want to say, again, I've got a lot, this has been the most well-received information that I've put out. And I received more comments on it and calls and notes and people on the street stopping me than I did when I wrote The Lament and played The Lament of Caleb Beach a year or so ago. So I'm going to repeat it again tonight, and perhaps more in the future. I want to talk about cannabis and marijuana, and I'm going to show again the clip from the recent selectmen meeting where the Democratic representative, Selectman Renzullo, discussed marijuana, the use of marijuana, with the selectman and the police chief. As promised last week, I have purchased the book that I mentioned last week and told you a bit about, The Lost Child, written by the English author Julie Myerson. I'm not sure. It's in the library at Beardsley Ann Memorial Library, but I gave them the check. They ordered it a few days back. I think they ordered it last week, and it should be in within a few days, and anybody can go up there and check it out and read it. And if you have children or young adults and you're worried about the use of marijuana, I suggest you read this book. Now, I read about it in the Sunday New York Times book review last week, page 10, August 30th, 2009. Now, marijuana, cannabis, commonly known as marijuana, is a psychoactive drug that is illegal to possess, use, or sell in the United States. And psychoactive, the word used in here, means a substance having a profound or significant effect on mental processes. And this book that I bought for the library for you all to read, if you're interested, perhaps your children should read it too, and all teachers in town should read it, educators, including the two selectmen I would recommend, should read this book and then never mention marijuana in a selectman meeting again unless it's in a positive way. With that, we will now show the clip from the selectmen meeting.
A couple times when you were going through drug investigations.
Yeah.
What kind of drug investigations exactly? I mean, are we talking about heroin or are we talking about marijuana?
No, we're talking about heroin and crack.
Okay.
Which both are a problem for us.
Right, because I would just say right off, I mean, our state legislature overwhelmingly, I think there was maybe 13 legislators that voted not to decriminalize marijuana. Massachusetts decriminalized marijuana. I think that the only reason it's not currently decriminalized is because our governor vetoed it. And personally, I lived in Colorado for 10 years. The citation out there is like, I think it's like a $50 ticket. I just hope we're not wasting any money on that.
No, the last drug operation that we had, and I can put together the cases that we had, I think we made 10 arrests on it. We're all for heroin and crack.
Right.
And
which is, you know, obviously
We
you
did
would...
those investigations on a shoestring. I went to Keith, explained to him we didn't have the money for overtime. My officers agreed to do it for compensatory time. We went out, put investigations together. We shut down some places that were right near the church that were dealing crack. There's people there that are still facing jail time. There was another place down on Park Place, a crack house that we shut down. There was a person that was selling Vicodin. He was getting prescriptions from this doctor in Waterbury and then selling the Vicodin up at Highland Way, and he was arrested. So we were productive with the limited amount that we had, and I need to continue to do that because you know you can't back off and stop your enforcement efforts. But we don't have the overtime money to do it, and I can't keep asking my officers to do it for compensatory time because eventually we pay overtime for that. So what I need is some assistance, and the federal government's going to give us that in way of about $10,000 in cash.
No, I was just curious because obviously there's a distinction between, you know,
It's not marijuana.
like that, you know, right? Which
Our province is a lot deeper than that.
Dave?
So I guess this is a little off the subject here, but I guess I just want to be clear. You're suggesting that the PD not bother to enforce the existing marijuana laws in the state of Connecticut because you believe it should be legalized?
I think that just we're talking about overtime, and that as it was listed down here, as far as investigations, contractual agreements, that was one of the things that he had listed. He cited not continuing the DARE program. You know, I think there's obviously a distinction between things like heroin and cocaine and marijuana. That's what I'm saying.
So you're saying he shouldn't spend much time worrying about marijuana?
I certainly wouldn't want a costly investigation to go and be wasting taxpayer dollars on that, no.
Wasting taxpayer dollars on drug violations. Okay, I just wanted to be clear.
Okay, well, as you know, my view on this is very simple. The police chief and the police department should continue to enforce the laws, and everybody should be very, very careful about marijuana because it is very, very powerful nowadays and very destructive, as I said on the program last week. Read the book and you will, or the review, and you will find out for yourself. Now I want to show you some lists about the now defunct Winchester Party. The Winchester Party ran several people in the election last time, lost every single seat, and when I looked at the amount of votes they got in each category, they were all pretty much at the bottom of the pile. So for the Board of Selectmen, the Winchester Party losers in the last election were Barbara Wilkes, the two-time select person, and Arthur Melcher, Susan O. Clausen, and John Bentley Wynn. They all lost and didn't receive very many votes. The Board of Education, Michael D. Fox, Carol O'Connell, I don't know either of them, and the controversial, very controversial, Lisa Smith. For the town clerk, Glenn E. Wynn, they all lost in the last election. And the constables, Harold P. Wilkes and Sean T. Melcher. Now, some of these people are running again this year for various seats. I'll just go through this quickly with you. Arthur W. Melcher is running for selectman. Lisa Smith is running for selectman. Last time she ran for Board of Education, didn't get a lot of votes. And Sean T. Melcher is running for the Board of Education. Last time he ran for constable and lost. So anyway, now I'm going to tell you my little story that I put together partly by using the history books and reading newspapers and, you know, learning over the years that I've been back here. As a timely follow-up to the tales, The Sword of Damocles and The Little Dutch Boy, that I applied to the town of Winchester a few weeks ago, I will tonight relate the tale of Rip Van Winkle, followed by a rough approximation of the Trojan horse, a tale from the Trojan War, as told in Virgil's Latin epic poem, the Aeneid. I will then relate a short, very rough approximation of the history of the town of Winchester, according to Bryan, including the tale of the town of Winchester's Rip Van Winsted, and a possible recent recreation of the ancient Trojan horse in Winsted. These tales have a certain relevance to the town of Winchester, as I will discuss tonight. Please pay attention, fellow positive revenue residents and fellow taxpayers, as it may help in your voting decisions on the announced election candidates. I would first like to show you a bit about, show you a picture of Rip Van Winkle, and they'll be up there for a while. Rip was a henpecked husband and villager of Dutch descent who loathed profitable labor. He lived in a nice village, very similar to Winchester at the time, at the foot of the Catskill Mountains, not far from here. He was an amiable man whose home and farm suffered from neglect. He was loved by all but his wife. One morning, he escapes the nagging wife by wandering up the mountains. There he encounters strangely dressed men, rumored to be the ghosts of Henry Hudson's crew, who are playing ninepins. After drinking some of their liquor, he settles down under a shady tree and, you all know this, falls asleep. He wakes and returns to his village, where he finds that 20 years have passed. He finds out that his wife has died and that his close friends have died in a war or gone somewhere else. He immediately gets into trouble when he proclaims himself a loyal subject of King George III, not knowing that the American Revolution has taken place. You heard some nice American Revolutionary songs tonight, and I'll play one more at the end of the program. An old local recognizes him, and Rip's now grown daughter takes him in. Rip resumes his habitual idleness, and his tale is solemnly believed by the old Dutch settlers, with certain henpecked husbands who also loathed profitable labor, wishing they shared Rip's good luck. The next picture you'll see will be Washington Irving. Rip Van Winkle is a short story by the American author Washington Irving while he was living in Birmingham, England. I spent quite a bit of time in Birmingham over the years, as a part of a collection entitled The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, published in 1819. The story is set in New York's Catskill Mountains, and it's set in the years before and after the Revolution, about the time that the town of Winchester became incorporated. You'll now see a picture of Virgil. The tale of the Trojan horse, the wooden Trojan horse, was a tale from the Trojan War, as told in Virgil's epic poem in Latin, the Aeneid. You will now see a picture of Homer. The events in this story from the Bronze Age took place after Homer's Iliad and before Homer's Odyssey. It was a stratagem that allowed the Greeks to finally enter the city of Troy and end their conflict. After a fruitless 10-year siege of Troy, the Greeks built a huge figure of a horse, you should see it on the screen, in which a select force of men were hidden. They left this gift in front of the entry gates to the city of Troy. The rest of the Greeks pretended to sail away, and the Trojans, thinking they were gone, pulled the horse into their city to be used as a victory trophy, and then closed the gates. That night, once inside the city, the hidden Greek forces crept out of the horse and opened the gates to allow the rest of the Greek army, which had sailed back under the cover of night, to enter Troy. The Greek army entered and destroyed the city decisively, ending the war. A Trojan horse has come to mean any trick that causes a target to invite a foe into a securely protected bastion or place. The priest Laocoon guessed the plot and warned the Trojans. And Virgil's famous line, "Do not trust the horse, Trojans. Whatever it is, I fear the Greeks, even when bearing gifts." This has now been shortened to beware of Greeks, or anybody else, bearing gifts. But the god Athena sent 2 sea serpents to strangle him and his 2 sons before he could be believed. King Priam's daughter, Cassandra, the future predictor, and that's a soothsayer, of Troy, insisted that the horse would be the downfall of the city and its royal family, but she too was ignored. Hence their doom and loss of the war. According to Homer, the city of Troy stood overlooking Hellespont, a channel of water that separates Asia and Europe. In the 1870s, a man named Heinrich Schliemann set out to find the lost city of Troy. Following Homer's description, he started to dig at his Arlik in Turkey and uncovered ruins of several cities, built one on top of the other. Several of the cities had been destroyed violently, but it is not clear which, if any, was the Troy of Homer's poetry. There is mention of the Trojan horse in Homer's Odyssey. The picture you see of Homer, he is blind. He was blind, and he had a boy leading him around from place to place. Now I'm going to read you my story. Once upon a time, there was a lovely valley at the foothills of the Berkshire Mountains, located in the county of Litchfield, in the northwest corner of the state of Connecticut. The town was originally colonized by hunters, fishermen, farmers, and possibly miners. There were also various clergy, shopkeepers, artisans, and others to serve their needs. You'll see a picture of that little town that I got from this book. The environment was a very beautiful town with plenty of green pastures and forests, and very clean natural lakes, rivers, and ponds. There was also plenty of wildlife. varieties of fish, and plenty of game to hunt. Everyone worked hard to earn their daily bread. They didn't miss 13 days. There were no hangers-on. Everybody had to earn their own keep. It was a very enjoyable place to live, work, worship, and raise a family. Rip Van Winsted was an early settler and a post-Revolutionary War fisherman in the most beautiful part of this lovely community. Although Rip was lazy and didn't like profitable labor, he enjoyed leisurely fishing in the lakes, rivers, and streams for his family's victuals. He would also trade his fish with the hunters and farmers in exchange for their products. They bartered in those days, exchanged their products with each other, their produce with each other, their labor with each other, in order to survive. The woods around the large lake were used for logging, and sawmills where lumber was processed for the building industry. Lumber of a different type, hemlock, was cut and often burned by the shore of the long lake to make charcoal for use in the community and elsewhere. The two men you see on the screen are charcoal makers. The lake shore also housed a few ice houses where the blocks of ice cut from the lake each winter were stored, buried in hay, for use in the warmer months. The dairy farmers that surrounded the town used the land around the lakes and ponds to graze their livestock and to take advantage of the abundance of grasses and clean water. There are still underpasses at the lake, the long lake, where cattle went in to drink water and feed on the grass in what is now the lake bed, but wasn't then. Other than farmers, loggers, and fishermen, few of the townspeople lived around the lake, as it was difficult to walk to town for work. Meeting houses and other amenities and conveniences that they needed. However, there were a few summer homes and winter homes, fairgrounds, a few pavilions, a few public beaches, a ferry boat or two, and landings for them around the lake. One of them is right in front of Kenny Pratt's house on West Wakefield Boulevard. There was also an hotel, a few lodges, and a dirt road that circled the lake, except were interrupted by a huge granite ledge at water's edge on the west side of the long lake. This cliff stopped the horse and buggy traffic from circling the lake in the early days. Sailboats, rowboats, and canoes could be rented and launched at the private boat launch near the small cafe that also sold dry goods and staples. The railroad, much later, brought visitors from and to the lake from the surrounding and far away towns and cities during the summer. It wasn't long before the local realtors and town leaders realized that the property around the lake could be purchased relatively inexpensively, divided into building lots of various sizes and communities of various sizes, and sold to all comers. Initially, the lots were sold at fairs and other gatherings at discount prices, and sometimes given away as door prizes at local fairs and events. At this time, the lake and its environment were beautiful, and picnicking, card playing, swimming, skating, peaceful sailboating, riding on large transport boats were the major recreations of the day. In parallel, major industrialists began to realize that the beautiful valley, with its two major rivers and the nearby lakes, could supply the water power for the town citizens and the water power to run their machinery. And the area surrounding the town could be developed to attract and house the personnel and infrastructures needed to support the town and run the factories. The industry rapidly grew, eventually reaching a height of 80 factories or more at its peak before the Great Flood of 1955. Some businesses were situated in the industrial zone at the top of Lake Street at Long Lake. There were gas stations there. There still are industries there. Eventually, the Long Lake was dammed, and the water was raised to provide enough water to turn the large water wheels and other power providing equipment needed by the factories and businesses to provide their finished goods. A tunnel from a smaller lake was built to help fill the Long Lake during extremely dry periods. Actually, that should be tunnel from other lakes. Joe Cadrain's an expert on this in this town. The landowners around the Long Lake began to erect seawalls to keep their properties from being washed away and or their land from being diminished. The raw materials to produce the products themselves were shipped to and from all parts of the world by horse and wagon, initially, and later by the railroad and trucks from factories and stations, railroad stations, throughout town. The town was rapidly becoming very prosperous. At this point, Rip Van Winsted, who was rather lazy and didn't like profitable labor, drank too much locally produced corn liquor, and fell asleep for a goodly number of years. As Rip Van Winsted slept, the industry and the population of the town and lake grew, prospered, and became more important to the local economy and that of others in the area and afar. Gilbert clocks were sold all over the world, and at their peak, I think they made about 2,000 a day. In addition to employment, the businessmen, industrialists that believed in profitable labor, and the religious leaders provided an abundance of schools, churches, parks, libraries, homes for the needy young. Don't forget, a lot of this was during the Depression, A lot of people needed help during the Depression. I've talked to people from the Gilbert home that are still alive, and they say that they never went for want during the Depression when they lived in the Gilbert home. They also provided public buildings, public safety, through the profitable labor of the citizens of the town. The Long Lake population grew in parallel with that of the town. And no one in the town or at the lake seemed very concerned about the pollution and the environment in general until the sewers were installed, the rivers were used to carry away some waste products from the homes, businesses, and factories. And as a result, many pollutants were entering the ground and perhaps the lakes over the years. Buildings of all sorts were erected on the banks of the river and lakes around the town. Vehicles and other waste was brought to the Long Lake each year. They used to race cars on the lake, on the ice in the wintertime. Vehicles and waste was brought to the Long Lake each year and allowed to fall into the lake when the ice melted in the springtime. The lake is now pretty clean of all that. Over the years, people have cleaned it out, but at that time, things were allowed to fall in. Often, before adequate dams were built, huge torrents of rain, hurricanes, cyclones, the history books are full of this, would occur periodically, and the rivers and lakes would rise and flood the lower parts of the town, causing much physical and financial havoc to the businesses, the environment, and to the taxpayers. After the '55 flood, we lost all the taxpayers on one side of Main Street. Some moved elsewhere, some didn't. A major flood occurred in 1955 that wiped out a good part of the downtown area on one side of the river. And at about the same time, or shortly after, with the advent of paved roads and trucking, the railroads stopped coming to town. The factories began to leave town for more prosperous locations, and there was no great demand to fill the empty, environmentally contaminated buildings that are still here in Winston to this day, although some have burned down and some have been torn down. The town began to deteriorate financially, as was the process of becoming a bedroom community. It was in the process of becoming a bedroom community for the profitable industries in the surrounding areas. Other events were simultaneously happening, some at the Long Lake. The most active pavilion burned down twice. It was burned down once and rebuilt and burned down again in the 50s. And the other was sold to the state for a boat launch to benefit interested residents of the state of Connecticut. Other buildings and lodges also burned down, including the major Long Lake Hotel. The town purchased the Hyperion rights to the Long Lake from an industrialist and again raised the lake water to keep it at a constant level to accommodate the rapidly increasing use of powerboats with their associated pollution, and to increase the water in the coves to make the land more suitable for summer and year-round cottages and homes. Several water skiing clubs increased the need for faster boats with their associated high-powered automobile engines. that created higher wakes that rose over the seawalls and began to wash private property into the lake. Over time, better roads were constructed around the lake. Thanks to a gift from Mr. Wakefield, the cliff was cut through and had a road around the lake. Some catch basins and a sewer system were installed. This in turn increased the amount and speeds of the road traffic and brought more non-residents in search of nirvana. Eventually, a Long Lake Taxpayer Association was formed in an attempt to ensure fair taxes and an attempt to protect the water quality. The Taxpayers Association morphed into the Long Lake Watershed Association. This association adopted a tax-sheltered charter that inhibited them from overtly participating in politics as an organization. A few of the individuals in the organization began to become more extreme in their belief and exceedingly more frustrated with the town and remainder of the lake residents, and began to seek another outlet for their frustration with the taxes and use of the lake and its surrounding by local residents. An apolitical Winchester Taxpayers Association was later formed, and then a minority political party called the Independent Party, and others in an attempt to place a check and balance on the rising property taxes. Both organizations were constantly applying pressure to the town leaders by approving and voting down tax increases where they deemed appropriate, aided by powers given to residents by the town charter. Meanwhile, the affluence in the economy over the good financial years, its proximity to New York City and Boston, and the availability of better building materials brought more demand for the properties around the Long Lake from summer residents, year-round residents, from areas near and far. Because of the demand, the property valuations and property taxes began to rise dramatically relative to other parts of the town. The lake residents became more and more concerned about the value of their property. Meanwhile, the townspeople were becoming less and less able to attract new, profitable, recurring revenue to town, and their infrastructure was beginning to crumble despite reasonable tax increases and grants from the state. Their school test scores were beginning to drop lower below the required levels, and students were transferring to other less expensive schools in the area in search for better test scores and cheaper costs. Soon a ray of hope for the town of Winchester appeared. After a few years of discussions with the progressive town leadership and much expensive planning, a developer offered the progressive town leaders at the time a proposition that they couldn't responsibly refuse: a quantum leap in profitable recurring tax revenue to the town of Winchester. The developer offered to build 2 medium-priced, major age-restricted housing projects on vacant parcels of land totaling about 600 acres in the hills along the Enterprise Corridor on the east side of the lake between Winston and Torrington. The town leaders at this time were favorable and requested the addition of an 18-hole golf course that would allow Winston residents to become members, some ball fields and other recreational amenities, and possibly a contribution towards a new firehouse. The developer would also be required to pay for the construction of miles of water and sewer pipe down the Enterprise Corridor to his property between Winston and Torrington. This would also benefit other Enterprise Corridor aspirants. Because of the size and use of the largest development that was proposed, it would include the golf course, the approval of the Army Corps of Engineers and the Department of Environmental Protection would be needed. This would take further time and cost more to the developer, more money. The developer began to apply for his permits for the land use boards. All of a sudden, a major controversy erupted in the town over the proposed developments and their developers. At this point, Rip Van Winsted awoke from the many years' sleep caused by the corn liquor locally produced and was very perplexed by the condition of the town and its residents, both in the town and at the lake. As a lazy man who loathed profitable labor, Rip saw the tremendous opportunity at hand. A minority of very extreme Long Lake Watershed Association members, mostly from the east side of the Long Lake, and their very few disgruntled town and lake supporters, frustrated with the ability to deal with town political issues via the Long Lake Watershed Association, withdrew from their personal political party affiliations and appeared to create a disgruntled citizen Trojan horse in an attempt to influence the newly formed independent party. A few Long Lake residents on the east side of the lake climbed into the Trojan horse and parked outside of the doors of the independent party, bearing the gifts of promise for the next election. The horse was invited into the gates, and out may have popped several leaders that did not appear to understand the mission of the independent party and its resolve. It seems now that they misunderstood and misjudged the independent party. Many of the existing and new independent party members and their new recruits ran for office and won many seats in the next election for the Board of Selectmen, the Board of Education, and some constable positions. At this point, a coalition appeared to be formed between the elected 3 independent party members and the 2 elected Democrat members who had shunned 2 other Democrats running for office on the newly elected Board of Selectmen to form a majority on the Board of Selectmen with the Republicans as an ineffective minority of 2. The relations between the possible majority, Indycrats they were called, coalition, and the Republican was opposite ends of the spectrum for the whole term, as our objectives were very different. To make a long story short, this coalition appeared to shut out the 2 Republican members, and the coalition appeared to be against the new development that offers such a promising future for the town, and at the time they were in favor of a large bond package to construct and or reconstruct major schools and buildings in town at the expense of the local and state taxpayers. Over time, the lake and town residents that entered the independent party from the Trojan horse and were elected became dissatisfied with the party and resigned. So the probable mission of the Trojan horse failed on this attempt. The recently unaffiliated members of the coalition decided to form a new political party and run for election again as members of this new political party called the Winchester Party. I showed you a list of those losers at the beginning of the program. They lost every seat. Having lost the election, the group formed a political pressure group appearing to be made up of the losers of the last election and their most ardent supporters. It now appears that the Trojan horse has been resurrected again and placed into use. This time, the target appears to be the Democratic Party, since it seems that the losers of the last election have brought the horse to their door as a gift to the Democrats that haven't won an election majority on their own merits in many years. They and their supporters seem to have taken a foothold in the Democratic Party, and the ex-Winchester Party, losing members or supporters, are running as 3 of the 5 allowed Democrat Board of Selectmen candidates. Since they are running on much the same platform as they ran on in the last election just 2 years ago, they may be heading for another great defeat. So, Rip Van Winsted awoke just in time to most likely see the Indycrats lose again, this time as a loosely joined team. How long will it last before the Democrats lose control of their own party? Perhaps it has happened already. The minority of Lake residents who pay 25% of the residential taxes in this town will be dictating to the townspeople who pay 75% of the residential taxes in this town. Does that sound reasonable to you? Have the Lake members taken over the Democratic Party? It looks that way. Let's see what transpires. In the meantime, I advise you to vote for the Republican candidates or the candidates from the Independent Party or the candidate running by petition. Thank you very much. I'll be back again next week. And next week, I think I'll talk more about the Democratic Party and their candidates. Thank you. Have a good week.